my name is River, and this is the first of my hopefully long series of travel podcasts. To begin with, I just want to share a couple of facts about me. First of all, I've been traveling for a couple of years, most of which I traveled solo, and many that cost me under £200. I've managed to blag flights sort of as low as £20 even. I also do this in between shift working, so I haven't quit my job to travel the world or anything like that. I basically just book these flights in between my shifts at work, which essentially means that I'm still getting a monthly paycheck, but every so often I can just escape for a few days at a time, go to a nice European country, come back and just feel refreshed. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I want to share some advice and tips that I've built up during my time traveling. I'm going to start with the booking process. Now, when I book flights, the first thing is I have to be very flexible. Non-flexibility isn't too much of an issue, but that's where the cost comes in. If you are more flexible, it is much easier to blag a cheap flight, especially if you live perhaps close to an airport or there's some sort of way you can get to an airport quickly. For example, myself, I live near Manchester Airport. I can hop on a train for under a fiver, and that train runs almost all night. So the timings isn't too much of an issue for me. And I think especially when you travel on your own, it's a lot easier to be able to kind of just jump on a train and just go. Some of the websites that I use Skyscanner, Google Flights, and Ryanair. That's quite a big one, especially for traveling around Europe. I would say it's best not to be too fussy. I'm going to say it's true, and that's just for the fact that I've experienced it myself. So just try in different browsers. Try on your phone, try in incognito mode, and just see if the prices fluctuate. I had that experience with a Ryanair flight to Budapest, I believe it was, and I saved about £20 just by doing it on my phone in incognito and also signing out of the Ryanair app, which is strange, but it works. So it's definitely something to look at. So once you've got that booked, you've got your flights booked. That's always the first step I do. Get the flights booked and then you're going. You've got no choice. And then I always have a look for accommodation. So generally with solo travel, to save money, hostels are definitely advised. Hostels not only are very good value, but they enable you to meet people when you travel to make you feel less kind of alone. And there's some good hostel apps, particularly Hostel World, which is great essentially for meeting people that are going to be in your hostel or even in the city that you're visiting. So I would 100% recommend looking on Hostel World to book your hostel. It can sometimes be slightly more expensive than using other websites or booking directly. So one thing I might advise is to perhaps just book the first night on Hostel World and then perhaps book the other ones direct. The reason I say this is because Hostelworld has the chat function, and that is really good. It's been a game changer for me. That enables you to actually talk to people, arrange meetups, and kind of get the best out of your stay, especially if you're looking for more of a social trip. I mean, the choice is yours. I've been on trips where I've been quite happy to stick to myself and just do what I want to do. But I think just having the option there is a really big thing, and it's great to use. So I would definitely recommend using Hostel World, and a lot of their bookings are refundable too. So although generally flights aren't refundable, I think it's definitely worth sort of doing refundable on Hostel World just to kind of minimize your loss if anything should happen where maybe the flight is delayed and you can't make it. Now, once you get to where you're staying, now this particularly applies for Europe, you might want to go somewhere else. So it's particularly in Eastern Europe, there are lots of countries that border each other. And last year I did a trip. I started in Bratislava randomly. Never really thought about going there, but it was a cheap flight. I booked a Flixbus after a couple of nights in Bratislava, and I ended up in Vienna, which was a really cool place at Christmas. And then after that, I was in Budapest, and within a couple of hours on a reasonably cheap Flixbus, they are very cheap, I was in another country, and I did that obviously twice. So I managed to see three different countries, and I flew back from Budapest, which meant two flights, three countries, two coaches, which I guess to some people can feel quite intense. But honestly, a lot of those flights and journeys were only a couple of hours. That's enough time to sit back and watch a film, and also means you get to explore a little bit more of Europe. And it also means that you're able to do it all in one go, especially if you're like me and you still work, then try and squeeze them in into your break is the best thing you can do. And I find often a lot of European countries and capital cities, 2 or 3 nights is more than enough time to see everything you want to see. And I always think, one day I'll come back and kind of relive that moment. But often, it's not about how long you spend there, it's kind of about the experiences you have when you're there. So I would definitely advise even perhaps doing day trips. I did a day trip to Switzerland. That was from Milan, and it went firstly past Lake Como, which is near Milan, and then it went to Switzerland, and we saw a lake in Switzerland. It was all in one day, and it meant I got to go to 2 countries. It was reasonably priced, and it was just a nice little addition to my trip to Milan, whilst ticking off 2 countries. So yeah, always have a look if you're in a European country and it's perhaps bordering another country. Have a look into options. Have a look into Flixbuses, day trips and things like that, and it will just help you kind of get the most out of your trip. Now, I know some people sort of go for these extreme day trips and stuff. That's never really been my style. I think if you can stay in a hostel relatively cheap, then it's good to at least get a couple of nights out of a trip. But maybe I'll try it one day. There's a few things you should do just to make your stay just a little bit more comfortable, not have to worry last minute about certain things. These are sort of steps that I advise you take as soon as you've booked your flights and your accommodation. To be honest, even your flights. And I'd say the first one would be travel insurance, which is really important, especially if something happens and you get ill. The costs in some countries can be astronomical. So if you've got that cover, then it's just something that you don't have to worry about. And what I've recently started doing is booking a year's travel insurance, and that's allowed me to travel anywhere in the world and know that I'm covered for a whole year. And it's just one less thing to do every time I book a trip. Secondly, having a eSIM. Now, you'll only really need this if your phone contract doesn't include roaming. Mine doesn't, and if I look at what my network provider charges for roaming, it's pretty high. If you don't want to pay those prices, then have a look at getting an eSIM. Now, an eSIM is something that you can connect to your phone without needing anything to plug into it or anything like that. It is literally what it says, internet SIM. And a website I'd recommend is probably Maya Mobile, but do a little bit of browsing and see what you can find. eSIMs are just data, but I find these days data is enough. If you do need phone calls or text for any reason, then you will maybe have to go through your actual phone provider. However, if you're happy just with data, I would 100% look into eSIMs, see what you can find, because they are generally very cheap. You can set them up in minutes, and it's just something to ensure that you are covered when you get to a new country, using Google Maps, using Hostelworld, things like that, which is another reason why I always connect to the hostel Wi-Fi when you get there. And thirdly, make sure your spending is with a card that doesn't charge any fees. So maybe first of all check that your bank account does allow roaming and does allow you to use that card. And if not, then a couple of good ones are Chase. Chase are really good, and also Monzo. That's a very popular one, and I think there's a few others out there, but just double check. And I would also recommend bringing a bit of cash, just a small amount of cash, just enough that you can have it in your pocket. And occasionally, some countries, I find Eastern Europe has quite a lot. Occasionally, now sometimes cash points are pretty good. You can just pop your card in, take money out, and have no fees. But occasionally, places, or more than occasionally, I'd say, do charge fees. So if you've got that cash with you already, just a small amount, not enough to make you a target, but just enough to have extra, then it's just another weight off your shoulders. So I'd recommend a mix of a card with no fees and just a small amount of cash and keeping it safe. Now, when you're packing, this kind of moves over to keeping it safe. There's a few things that I would say are essential, especially when staying in a hostel. Firstly, when I book on Ryanair, I always just go with the small bag under the seat, and that's the same for other airlines. Just go with what's included in the price, because you could easily pay double, triple the airfare just to bring a slightly bigger case or suitcase. But I will also highlight that it is very important to reach the sizing limits that they set out, because they will not hesitate to charge you. I've seen it happen many times. Luckily, it's never been me, but I've walked past many people, even some people just with the wheel sticking out of their small suitcase, and that's instantly 60, 70, 80 euro. And it's awful because there's no real choice. You have to pay it or you're not getting on the flight. So to avoid that, find a bag that does fit the exact measurements. Ryanair's are slightly smaller than other airlines, but if you stick with theirs, then at least you'll know whatever airline you're on, you're covered. If you just search on Amazon or somewhere like that, bags with this measurement, check the measurement of the airline, and then that means you're covered. Now, things to take with you, things I would say are essential. Now, the first one is in a lot of hostels, you will have to pay to use a towel, and that can be up to sort of 5 to even 10 euro. So you're not going to have a lot of space, but if you buy a microfiber towel, they sell them in a lot of kind of sports shops and places like that. Now, that's going to save a lot of space. It's not as nice to wash yourself with, dry yourself with, but it does save a lot of space. So I would highly recommend get yourself a microfiber towel, and they also dry super quick. So you can just hang it up in the hostel dorm and it should be dry by the end of the day. I'd also recommend bringing a padlock. In fact, more than recommend, I'd say definitely bring one because most hostels will have lockers. However, to lock the locker, you need your own padlock. And if you don't have one, that could be another 5 to 10 euro that they're going to charge you. So definitely bring a padlock. I would bring a combination one and just remember it. That means there's one less thing to sort of remember if you had keys. And also in terms of your phone and power, obviously your phone's such an important part of your life now. I generally only bring my phone with me, so I don't have any other technology apart from my Kindle. So my phone is essential, which means that I make sure I bring a power bank fully charged. I bring an adapter. Now the adapter I have can suit most countries. However, just check the country you're going to and make sure that you have the right adapter for that country. A lot of countries do have USB ports now, but you will find in a lot of hostels, particularly, especially in certain countries, it will just be a plug with whatever adapter they use. So make sure you have the right one. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck. I would also say just to bring like a little extra bag, like a little side bag or something like that. Something you can take out of you in the day, but it's not going to take up too much space. I find that these kind of bags can be good, especially sort of in summer. Just to bring a few extra bits for you. You can shove a power bank in there. Sometimes if it's a place, for example, that doesn't have a locker or I'm being extra cautious, I might even put my passport in there. Generally, it's okay to lock that up as long as it's locked up, but that's always an option if you're somewhere where you don't have that option or maybe it's your last day. And I would say if you've got all of those things, then you should be pretty okay and ready to go. Now, just before you go, I always like to plan ahead. That's not to say that spontaneous plans can't be fun, because I do enjoy a spontaneous plan, and I've had lots of trips where I've sort of had a rough plan and then spontaneity has taken over and I've ended up having an even better time than I thought. However, I think it's good to have a rough plan just so if these spontaneous things don't happen, you're covered and you're not in a country thinking, I'm wasting my time. So I would recommend just jumping on ChatGPT and type in the place you're going, the days you're spending, the time of year, and it'll give you a day-by-day itinerary. Obviously, you don't have to follow this step by step, but it gives you a good guide and it always tells you the best places to go. Now, be a little bit careful with this because occasionally it can get things wrong. For example, a museum that may have closed down might still be on there, or some timings might be wrong. So take it with a pinch of salt, but I always use it as just a general guide, and it helps know that regardless of what happens when I get there, I've got this plan. And in terms of socializing, Hostel World do have a lot of events. Now, these can show up occasionally on the app, or other times you'll see them when you arrive, and it will just show you lots of different events that the hostel are putting on. And sometimes it can be other hostels too. And even if you're not a member of that hostel, even if you're not staying there, you can go and you can take part, which is really cool. And often they're the same sort of things. They have amateur comedy nights, they have karaoke nights, they have walking tours. Most of the walking tours are free. You can also find those on other websites. Have some cash for a little tip. I think it's always nice to give someone a tip for those. But it's good that they are free as well, because there's sort of no pressure to pay a certain amount or anything like that. And I'm sure they're appreciative of whatever they get. Also, on the Hostel World chat, it's always good just to maybe even drop a message. I generally would advise waiting until the day before or when you get there, because I often see messages from people weeks before they arrive saying who's staying on this day, and generally I think people don't really look or kind of make plans until kind of the day before when they're there. So that's kind of what falls into the spontaneous plans. Or it may even be that you just meet people on the events and you end up having a good time and it's nice and spontaneous. But if not, there is the option there, the Hostel World chat. And I think that can be a good way just to meet people, maybe even just go for a coffee with someone. And there's people there that want to do museums, coffee shops. Other people might want to go out. They often have different categories of events and things that people want to do. So whether you're the partying type or just the kind of person who likes to just have a walk around and see different things, it's a great time to sort of go on there and see if you can get some company, which is really nice. Now, when you do arrive to the hostel and you check in, it's always worth just checking if they expect cash or whether it's going to come from your bank account or maybe card payment. So that's something to consider because that could change the amount of money that you take with you. But if you just look on the settings, it will always tell you, and then you'll be able to budget accordingly. I would probably say, for example, if you do need a bit of extra cash to pay when you get there, just have a little look and see whether the exchange rate is better if you go to a travel agent before you leave, or if you actually just withdraw the money from a cash point when you're there. Often withdrawing from a cash point can be cheaper if you have a card with no fees like Chase, but if you don't, then it could be better just to go to a travel agent. So it's always best just to compare. Sometimes the difference can only be a couple of pounds, euros, dollars, but I think it's good to check because when you're on a budget and things like that, some places €2 can be a whole pint. So it's definitely worth checking when you can. So when you arrive at the country, often there'll be some sort of transport that can take you from the airport to the main city. Now it's always sort of worth checking before you go how you're going to do this. Some of them just have a simple subway system or something like that. It's a reasonable price. Others have kind of bigger fees to get from the airport. Some even have shuttles, so it's always worth checking the distance because you can get a 2 hour distance from the airport to the city. And if that's something you don't fancy and the cost kind of outweighs the saving on the flight, then it's definitely something to consider. And there are also a few countries that will charge you an excess from the airport. So kind of just to get from the airport and use the tube, the subway system, it could be an extra €10 or so. Now, often there are other alternatives that will be cheaper, for example, getting a bus. So that's definitely something to consider. Personally, I kind of like to be able to just jump straight on a train, a tube, and get there. And I just kind of think, well, it's a small amount to pay to kind of get to where you want to go. But the option is there. So I thought it was worth explaining. And when you are there, you want to have a look for some food and drink. I think it's always good in a new country to check out some of the local cuisine. But if you want to do it without spending a fortune, I would 100% recommend going to places like local markets. I would recommend looking on an app called Too Good To Go, which they use in the UK, but they also use it in a lot of other countries, especially around Europe. And often there can be sort of little cafes and local places that have food for a couple of euro. And it's just a chance to try food from that country without spending a lot. I mean, perhaps you and a couple other travelers could maybe all get one each, bring it back to the hostel if the hostel allows food, or if it's summer, perhaps sit in a park and just see what kind of food you get from that country. I would also say just to pick up snacks and bits like that, and perhaps even cooking, because a lot of hostels do have kitchens. Most places have supermarkets like Lidl, and Lidl is a bit of a godsend. I do really like Lidl, especially for their protein shakes, because when I'm away, my eating isn't always what it would be back home. So having a couple of protein shakes can definitely help that. So keep an eye for a Lidl, because sometimes even these Lidls do slightly different items depending on which country. So even though you're just in a Lidl, you can actually find some pretty cool foods from different countries. Now, I would say when going out for drinks and things like that, it's always worth kind of double checking the prices before you order. Now, some places will just show that on the menu, but they might not tell you. And since you are a tourist, they may inflate the price. So I think it's always worth just double checking what the price will be. to ensure you don't get ripped off. And also be aware of kind of tourist traps. Some tourist traps, or what people call tourist traps, I kind of disagree with, because if it is something that you really want to do, and yeah, you might pay a little bit more for a cup of coffee or and see something, I don't really mind because I think it's worth it. However, there are sometimes times where these prices will be massively inflated, or perhaps people will even try and trick you and tell you somewhere's closed. For example, in Thailand, often the tuk-tuk drivers will sort of tell you that a temple is closed and offer to take you to a different one, and then they're going to get some sort of commission and money out of that, which I think is pretty deceiving. So just sort of be careful, and I wouldn't listen to what everyone tells you, just to keep yourself safe, essentially. Once your trip's over and you've had a really good time, obviously you just make sure that you get back to the airport with plenty of time. Last thing you want to do is to be stuck in a foreign country and stuck on a tube or something like that. So always just make sure you get there with plenty of time. I find if I miss the flight out there, yeah, that's pretty guttering, but at least I'm still home. If you miss the flight back, it's, you've got no choice but to get back and possibly pay for an inflated price. So yeah, definitely just make sure you give plenty of time, check how long it will take, and ensure that you get there with lots of time to spare, even without checking things in and stuff. Now that's another thing I will add with the checking in process. Now, some airlines, for example Ryanair, you must check in online before you go, otherwise you'll get charged at the gate, and that can be quite a big charge. So I would, even though they often send email reminders, I would set yourself reminders. It's usually 24 hours before. Make sure you are checked in, you have your seat, you have your ticket on your phone. I know now Ryanair do not accept printed tickets, so just make sure that you have that on your phone, and then you'll have no issues at the airport. And obviously, when you leave somewhere, just make sure that you've taken everything with you. And also, it's really cool just to kind of keep in touch with everyone that you've met. I generally use Instagram. I've tried keeping up with people on WhatsApp before, but I find Instagram's great just for the stories and things. So, you can see what other people are up to. I generally don't use it too much when I'm back home. However, when I go away, I always like to see what people are doing. And, sometimes you can go to a country and you can discover that someone you met 6 months previous is in the same country, and you can meet up and have a coffee. Or even sometimes if you stay in touch with someone, you can even meet up and maybe they'll let you stay at their home, which has happened to me before, which was a really cool experience, and also saved me a lot of money on accommodation. It can lead to new travel opportunities, which is such a good thing about solo traveling. You can start on your own and you can build up this community of other travelers. You can meet up with them in the future, or you may never see them again. But I just find that it's nice to kind of have that sort of a group of people from all over the world that you've met at one point or another. You may see them again, you may not, but it's the kind of memories that just kind of last a lifetime. So I did say at the start of this podcast, I would kind of talk about how to push yourself maybe to do more solo traveling. Now, the way I kind of did it was I just started with small steps. It kind of reminds me of the book Atomic Habits that tells you to just take small steps towards your goals. And once you take that first small step, everything does become easier. So, for example, the first step I took was I took a trip to Edinburgh. Now, I live in the UK, so it didn't take me too long to get there. I didn't have to fly, but I did go out there on my own. It was just a chance to kind of go somewhere by myself and experience a trip on my own, and I had a really good time. So the next trip I did was Dublin, which meant that I had to get a flight. It was less than an hour, so super, super quick, but it did mean that I got to experience the first solo flight, and it also meant that I still got to experience a solo trip. And then when I finally decided to start venturing Europe, I knew of a friend that lived in Spain. You may have friends or people you know that have moved abroad, and I mentioned to him that it'd be really cool to meet up and stay. But what I did is I decided to extend the trip. So he lived in Valencia. I decided to go to Madrid first. It was the first time I'd stayed in a hostel for a very long time. However, when I got there, I had a really good time. I met this Australian guy. We got chatting. We went for some food, and yeah, it was great. and it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. So getting yourself out there and pushing yourself to travel will definitely change your life. Once you have done your first trip, I think you'll find it's very addictive. I try and get a trip in whenever I can. I'm hoping to go away next month to Romania, which will be really cool. I've never been there before. So I would highly recommend that you follow this advice and get yourself on a trip and let me know how it goes. So thank you for listening.